salt, feathers, jade, cacao, obsidian. So many amazing trade items were transported along the waterways of the Mayan kingdoms. And we're going to talk about it today, but before we get into it, I want to remind you that this is Latina Literati. If you enjoy great books, interesting people from past and present, and places, then this is the channel for you. Cacao has been traded for 3,000 years. It's been cultivated by the Maya and traded for thousands and thousands of years. Think about it as we sit here today on this continent, what it meant for the Maya to produce this very luscious, very frothy drink that they actually condimented with chile, and it was considered a drink of the gods. It was used in place of money. That's how valuable it was. So the system of trade that was used at the time, and again, we're talking about 3,000 years ago, was not, I'm going to give you gold and you're going to give me cotton or cacao or feathers or jade. It was, oh, give me a basket of, for example, your woven cotton and I'll give you a basket of cacao. So it was much more of a trade of intrinsic value than a subjective value when you have money. That's kind of a little bit of the difference of what you have. But really what we want to talk about today are the waterways, just vast waterways used for trade. And so you ask, well, how did they trade? Well, they used canoes. And some of these canoes were big enough that you had 12 and 12 people rowing, men rowing on either side. And when you hollow out a canoe, that's really sturdy. When you compare that to the galleons that splintered apart throughout the Caribbean and lost what they were carrying thousands of years later, you think, wow, canoe is really simple. It does limit the size, but it's really sturdy. And so these waterways were used for trade, and trade was considered something almost ritualistic. Those traders who would take their canoes from the Mayan cities and take the goods from one city to the next would literally paint themselves as gods, representing the gods in bringing richness and value to the next city. So really, the Maya believed that the spirit world was omnipresent, and it was especially present in the flora, the fauna, and the waterways. And we had the opportunity to visit the Petén Lagoon and Valley area water system, amazing, beautiful place that naturally floods. And what that means is that agrarian pursuits and pastoral pursuits can't really take place in the area. And that's what's protected all of the animals that live there. Just a beautiful, beautiful place. Highly recommended. We visited several rivers that feed into the Petén area. And these include the Rio Pasión, the Rio Pucté, the Rio Usumacinta that actually flows north all the way to Tabasco and to the Yucatan. Amazing rivers, beautiful flora and fauna, and I think we'll do a separate video just on the flora and fauna. But these waterways were central to trade in the Mayan kingdoms. And so in these pristine waterways, as these canoes would go back and forth to these city-states, one of the most precious items that they would take was obsidian, what's called volcanic glass. And they've been able to reconstruct the trade routes because of the obsidian that's been found not just in the Mayan world, in the heart of El Mundo Maya, but beyond. It was so precious the obsidian, it was used for adornment, it was used for weaponry, it was used for ritual and religious ceremonies, and they reused the same obsidian again and again and again until it was nothing. That's how precious obsidian was. Really interesting. And they can tell not just by the color of obsidian which volcano it came from, but also the chemical traces. And so they have been able to recreate the trade routes, and you see vast, vast waterways being used for internal trade routes. It's fascinating, fascinating. We're just starting to get a sense of how intricate these waterways and the trade routes were to the Mayan kingdoms, how important and central they were to the flourishing and really vibrant cities of the Maya. We've talked about the importance of salt and human civilization before. In fact, I've recommended a book called Salt in the past. But what we had not maybe talked about is how central salt was in the trade of the Mayan economies. And so for inland cities, salt was needed to preserve food as it is around the world. And you can trace human civilization to salt flats. You won't find early civilization that is not near salt. That's how much we as a species need salt. And so in the Mayan economies, you had basic commodities like salt. The people who produced it, at least in Spanish, are called salineros. And you had things like cotton, very fine woven cotton, which was traded and was considered very, very valuable as well. And then you had even more precious goods that were considered luxury goods like jade that was used for jewelry and adornment. And you had, of course, tropical feathers, the feathers of the sacred quetzal bird and other parrots and other birds that would be used in the headdresses of the elite and the royal families. So all of these goods are being traded through all these waterways. And we'll show you some maps here of some of these rivers and tributaries. Just amazing to be on the water, because when you're on the water, your perspective is completely different than on land. And as you're going forward in these rivers, what you see is very, very different than when you're traveling on land. So it was really a very special trip, and I thank the family and friends that made this possible. And on to my favorite part of the video, the book recommendations. So we're in front of a lake, but it is not in Guatemala, and it happens to be in the middle of a rainstorm. So we're filming inside the car so that we can film, because outside it's raining. This week, I'm going to recommend two books for you. The first is The Real Business of Ancient Mayan Economies. And this book is interesting because it talks about economic trade at all levels. So from farmers' fields to wealthier merchants that are exchanging perhaps more luxurious goods, it really takes a big picture look at how central the bartering system and the exchange is. And if you go to, even today, thousands of years later, you go to tianguis or a flea market or a mercado, you will see how vibrant this part is of not just Mayan society, but of general societies in this hemisphere, traditional societies. The barter and exchange of things is absolutely central to economic activity, and it certainly was 3,000 years ago in the Mayan cities. So highly recommend this book. I think it's a great introduction and also an analysis of the economic activity at many levels, not just any particular group. So highly recommended. The second book is called Ancient Mayan Commerce, and it explores economic models in the Mayan world using the case study of Chenchucmil. And this is a very interesting city because it doesn't have a ruler. It doesn't really have any structure. Its reason for being, raison d'être, raison de ser, is literally trade. And so everything, all activity in this city of Chenchucmil is literally around trade. And so this is an analysis of what economic activities were taking place and the processes that the economies used and took place and transactions and all that using this case study. So interesting, highly recommend it. And as always, we want you to support your local library. So check to see if these books are there. If they're not and you'd like to purchase them, then check with your local bookseller because we always want to support our local booksellers. We love you. If not, we will link them below if you want to purchase them new or used from independent booksellers because we always want to support independent booksellers. Again, this is one of a series of videos that we're making on our trip to the Maya world. To the heart, el corazón del mundo Maya. And so thank you so much for coming to the end of the video with us. And this is a joint journey. If you haven't, please subscribe to Latina Literati and let us know what it is you'd like us to talk about and what you'd like us to explore together. We wish you, as always, mucho cariño, mucho salud y mucho amor. Gracias.